Not saying I feel any ill will towards these people, but it does disturb me that there are now Severance fans who didn't have to wait 3 years for that cliffhanger. I just feel like our experiences of the show are so fundamentally different at this stage that we might as well be watching entirely different things. I mean, I was watching Severance back when the fandom was like 10 guys on Reddit, and we would all, screenshot computer monitors in the background and then zoom in really close because we thought there might be clues. It's my opening joke for this video. I don't think it's funny, but it does convey to you the information that I was watching Severance before you, which is really what I'm trying to get across right now. This is a weird show because I like it for the most part, but I also don't like the second season. Though I do kind of like the second season. I mean, I watched the whole thing as it was airing every week. I sat down at 8 in the morning to watch some Severance. There is some point sort of halfway through the second season where I really actually stopped enjoying it because I felt like all of the internal logic of the show was kind of breaking down. I don't mean that I didn't literally understand what was occurring, but just that it felt like the show didn't understand what was occurring. It felt like every event was suddenly taking place because, it's what a TV show might do rather than it was what made sense for the story or the characters. To explain what the hell I mean by that, there's basically two ways that a show can make sense. Any event in a show will have a Doyleist explanation and a Watsonian explanation. And those are fancy words to say that they have stuff that makes sense within the show and stuff that makes sense as a choice for a showrunner to have made. So for example, in the Severance episode of Woe's Hollow, the Doyleist explanation is that Dan Erickson, and I quote, always wanted to put the innies in a location like that. It's just what he wanted to do. This is different from the Watsonian explanation, which in this case is the Milchick thought that everyone was getting too rebellious, and so he wanted to give them what they wanted so they would chill the fuck out. So he took them outside on a field trip. For the most part, I'd say I think most people probably don't really care about the Doyleist explanation for a show. I think you have to sort of be a television nerd to give a fuck why Dan Erickson and Ben Stiller did something in Severance. I think most people care more about the plot reasons why something happened. They care about what the characters think and why the story is going in a direction. They don't care about, physically why a story is going in a direction. Using authorial intention to suggest how a show should be read is, I think, a somewhat controversial thing. The idea of a kind of death of the author has certainly become increasingly relevant in pop media analysis. Nevertheless, if you're trying to determine how much sense a decision makes, I think the author's intention is sort of a vital part of that. Especially in a mystery box show, where the creators knowing, what is happening and why things are happening will literally directly inform how good the rest of the show is. I will not be bringing up Lost in this video. Obviously, not everything can or even necessarily should be answered in a mystery show, but the creators should, you would hope, have some idea of why everything is occurring. Now, obviously, in a perfect world, I'd just phone up Dan Erickson and say, hey, buddy, what the hell did you mean by that? But I can't do that. So instead, I'm going to offer Doyleist readings of scenes, which are kind of just what I imagine happened. It's not completely just what I imagine. I'm not just pulling shit out of my ass. I also have, citations and things that people have said that suggest certain things. And also, I'm using common sense. So with all that being said, I'm going to tell you about 3 specific scenes in Severance, and what I think they mean from a Doyleist perspective and from a Watsonian perspective. And then we can get into why I think, Severance as a show is kind of lost, which I'm not going to be talking about in this video.
Oh, I miss those nights. I was a piece of shit, though.
Used to be.
I said was!
I don't want to spend too much time recapping here. I assume if you're watching this video, you've seen the show and know, at least the basic premise. But halfway through season 2 of the show, Irving is fired from his job at Lumen. When he's outside in the real world, he meets Burt Goodman, who was a guy who he was kind of co-workers with. I mean, they worked in different departments. But, they saw each other. They had kind of a cute romance. Importantly, though, Burt and Irving never really reconciled their romance. They never kissed. They went into a beautiful plant room, and Irving said he wasn't ready. Then they touch foreheads together, and it's quite sweet. But anyway, they're out to meet, and they have a weird dinner party with Bert's husband, and they seem to, sort of hit it off. And then some stuff happens, and Bert ends up driving Irving to the train station, so we can get out of town and be safe from Lumen's prying eyes. It is sort of implied that he was taking him there to kill him, like that's a fake out moment. You know, you think Bert's gonna take him out and kill him behind the back, but he actually drives him to the train station. So, I mean, I think we have to assume he was planning on taking him to the train station the whole time. You might think he was still planning on killing him and just kind of made a last-minute decision. That's up to each of us as individuals. Anyway, the scene I want to talk to you about is in the train station. Bert is telling Irving to get on the train, and Irving tries to get Bert to come with him. Bert doesn't think this is a good idea, and they go back and forth on it for a while. There's kind of a romantic tension between them, and though Irving does not in fact convince Bert to come with him, they do touch their foreheads together, and Irving tells Bert that he's ready now. This is a pretty obvious parallel to the previous scene. I mean, it feels kind of silly to point it out, but I would say that the Doyleist explanation for this is that this scene, which may be Irving's last, it's unclear if John Turturro wants to come back to the show or is planning on coming back to the show. His character is kind of left in an ambiguous state. That this, his final scene should parallel basically the most popular Irving scene ever. We should give the audience some closure on this aspect, this plot line, before Irving leaves forever or maybe comes back. I don't know yet. Doing this, it suggests that Bert and Irving's relationship could be as it was in Lumen. Says that, if this world were more fair, if Lumen were a less evil company somewhat, then Bert and Irving actually could be together as themselves. Irving is ready now, but they still can't be in a relationship. How sad for them. So the part that maybe doesn't, make sense, the part that would need some sort of internal explanation is that Irving does say, "I'm ready," Watsonianly. This is confusing, right? Like, he's, he can't remember that. He doesn't remember being in any. He doesn't remember his time at Lumen. Why would he say something that, so clearly reflects that? And you can say it's just kind of an artistic choice. Like, that's just, it doesn't mean he actually remembers. It just means that it's something that he's saying now. But I like to think that that choice is, more intentional than a simple parallel. And what the scene tells us is that Severance literally just doesn't quite work. The scene tells us that even though Irving cannot consciously recall his time at Lumen, there is some deeper psychological level at which he can access something like memory, something like a sense of things that he might have said or people he might have known there. He might not know why he's saying, "I'm ready," but we, the audience, have to assume that he's saying it because, well, it's the thing he said before. He's literally communicating something to Bert in this scene. He's communicating that I wasn't ready before, but I am now. And I would say that's probably because his memories from Lumen are actually able to bleed through in some way. This is an incredibly sort of beautiful and startling moment, right? Like, this is a moment of profound revelation. And functionally, what this tells us is the same thing as the Doyleist explanation tells us, that Bert and Irving could have been together, that they could have had a relationship, they could have, been the same people that they already were, but that's been taken from them by a cruel and evil company. It also says that, Severance can't stop some information, so surely it can't stop any information. There's a path out of this. Severance is not, an end-all be-all thing. These characters can return to the people they were before this was done to them. Scene is telling us that though Severance can separate conscious memory, it can't separate unconscious memory. And we know this not only because of this scene, but because of other scenes in the show. All throughout the first season, Irving keeps having these goop dreams. He has dreams at work, where there's goop everywhere, and he doesn't know what the goop is. Season 1 finale learned the goop is actually paint, and that Irving's outie is intentionally staying awake so that he can sort of gain memories from his Severance time, to have intel on Lumen or break his Severance chip in some way. I don't really know, they won't tell me. The goop is knowledge that Irving has and that he can access through the barrier of Severance. He also knows, for example, that most gardeners don't work at night. Sure, this isn't necessarily information specific to him and is maybe more under the purview of, the innies can name states and they know, what breakfast is. But it kind of is sort of relevant specifically to him, right? I mean, we learned that he knows this in a scene where specifically we're being told that Helena would not know this. Helena does not know that most gardeners don't work at night. She doesn't know anything about the real world. Irving, however, someone who does live in the real world, who is, a normal sort of middle-class guy, he has this information, and every version of him has it. He knows that gardeners don't work at night. He tells us that. Again, in a Doyleist sense, this scene exists simply to put information across, to tell us that Irving is in some way suspicious of Helly, which is important later on. Again, in a Doyleist sense, this scene exists simply to put information across, to tell us that Irving is in some way suspicious of Helly, which is relevant later on because that's why he gets fired. But it is also literally telling us something about how Severance works. This is a mysterious thing, and we're learning information about it through the show. That's why we're watching it. This also isn't just specific to Irving, this also happens to other characters, like Mark, for example. We can see Mark remembering stuff from his life when he builds that tree in front of his wife Gemma before he knows that she is his wife Gemma, or that his wife Gemma died when she crashed her car into a tree. Allegedly. And also testing the, bleed-through of information is, I think, pretty explicitly what Lumen is trying to do with the innies that we see. But we know that because it's what they're doing with Gemma, right? In the basement, they're putting Gemma in situations that she might find personally stressful. They make her build a crib because they know that she struggled with fertility and had a miscarriage, and that would be traumatizing to her on some unconscious level. We know that the Severance strips full of the other characters don't have this blocking ability because when Gemma's does, everyone's, shocked and elated. Everyone's like, wow, we finally did it. Severance now works. It didn't previously.
Explain to me why it's funny. It's because she's alone?
You thought it was funny.
I thought it was interesting.
The second scene I want to talk about is at the start of season 2, with Helena and Mark. At this point, Helena is aware that Mark and Helly had a relationship within Lumen, and she goes to meet him at a Chinese restaurant, unbeknownst to him. They talk to each other, and there is some kind of spark, some chemistry between them that Mark seems confused by. He doesn't know why he likes Helena, but he does. He feels something like love for her, and so he goes with it, even though he has no explanation for that love. So, to me, this is clearly in the show because it's sort of fucked up and evocative, right? What if Mark met this woman and felt love for her, felt some romantic attachment to her for the first time since his wife died? Wouldn't that be crazy? Wouldn't that feel kind of evil and nasty? What a crazy situation to put Mark through. It's an interesting scenario to put Mark in, and the point of the show is basically just to put Mark in interesting scenarios. I suppose it would also technically be interesting if Mark met Helena and felt absolutely nothing, had no, connection, no meaningful feeling towards this woman, but it wouldn't be kind of salacious or uncomfortable, right? Like, it wouldn't really be as interesting. It would, it would be worse in many ways. Severance would be a worse show if that scene wasn't in it. And I'm sure that the creators agree with me because they put this scene in there. They put the scene in the show, and it's a good scene, and I like it. But again, this scene is literally telling us something about how Severance works. We know that information can transcend Severance, but here we're learning that emotions and, dare I say, love can transcend Severance. It's kind of an offshoot of a thing, but I really like that love transcends Severance thing caught on so much. It's literally a joke that Dylan makes. Literally just a gag. It's just a gag he's doing. Not in a serious scene at all. One of the most quoted lines. And it's Dylan. And he is having a laugh. But this idea of love transcending Severance feels big and important to the themes of the show. The dystopia of the show says that nothing is our own, even our memories can be altered, can be controlled by a capitalist force. And the idea that love transcends this tells us, the hopeful side of that story, that even if we have nothing, even if we don't have our own minds and our own memories, we're allowed to keep our love. We're allowed to have our love for one another, and that is, at the end of the day, all we truly can own under capitalist rule. And that's a really beautiful message. That's a lot of the reason why I like Severance, because I think, I find that evocative and cool and fun and sweet. We also learn elsewhere in the show that this isn't only the case for love, it's the case for any emotion. In season 1, Petey tells Mark that he's still grieving his wife when he goes to the Severance floor. His sadness cannot literally be taken out of his body. He still feels sad every day, all the time, only one version of him has no idea why he feels that way. This is kind of a tangent, but I feel like we have to kind of infer that there is some level on which Mark kind of does know what happened to him. Like, he knows that he's grieving, he knows that he feels some sense of sadness towards a tree. He knows that he connects that tree with Gemma and with the idea of, this red and green candle that she made. He might not be able to connect the idea of Gemma to the idea of Miss Casey, but he also clearly kind of can. He builds the tree in front of her. There's some level to which he has kind of all of the pieces to put that together. And it's in character that he doesn't, act on that. He doesn't think about that consciously. He's a very evasive guy. The whole show is built on the fact that he is trying to run away from this grief that he finds so horrible to experience. But he does, he does literally have all of that information with him. This is how he feels. We're told this repeatedly in many instances. I don't have anything to say about that right now, but I will in a minute. So just let's put a pin in that.
I really wanted to have 2 girlfriends.
You already have a girlfriend?
I do, yeah, but I wanted to.
The final scene that I want to talk about is also the very last scene of the show so far. So Severance Season 2 ends with Mark being given a choice. He can either go back into Lumen and stay with Helly and, fight sort of an internal revolution, we imagine, or he can leave Lumen with the newly freed Gemma. After a few moments of thought, Mark turns away from Gemma and he goes back to the building with Helly. When describing this scene in an Inside the Episode special, Adam Scott, who plays Mark, if you didn't know, Mark turns back, he goes back inside Lumen with Helly because he sees Gemma and he realizes that he has no feelings for her. Adam Scott suggests that we read this scene as, Mark is in love with Helly, this is Innie Mark, a different guy from Outie Mark, and he, he's a Helly guy. That's the number one Helly enjoyer. He likes her and he wants to go and hang out with her, and he doesn't really care about this other woman that much. This is kind of all well and good, but it doesn't seem to make sense. I think there are probably a couple of different reasons why this scene would have been put into the show by the creators. I think, for one, the first season ended on such a sort of climactic and interesting cliffhanger that Season 2 feels like it kind of has to do a similar thing. Another is that the whole season is built around these moments of profound emotional understanding. Bert and Irving find each other and their love allows them to momentarily transcend Severance. Dylan meets his real-world wife and they fall in love all over again. Mark meets Helena, and for the first time since his wife died, he really likes someone. When we finally reach the ultimate version of this, Mark is able to meet his wife, the woman he's been thinking about the whole show, the woman the whole show is built around, who unconsciously informs all of Mark's actions. When you get to that point, it's interesting to look away from that, isn't it? Sure, Mark could go with Gemma, we all expect him to, it's the thing that makes sense to do, but it's not very exciting, is it? It's not, salacious or nasty. Mark choosing Helly feels big, it feels interesting. It makes you ask questions like, where are we going from here? What the hell is happening? What is even fucking going on? It's a really great scene and it leaves you on, frankly, an incredible high. However, it doesn't quite make sense, right? Like, you still sort of can't pair that with everything else that we know about the events of the show internally so far. When talking about this scene, Dan Erickson said the following, which I'm going to read out for you. I think there's no easy answer to that question in terms of what it transcends, and it may be different for different people. In the case of Irving and Bert, we see that there is something that transcends, whether it's some sort of instinctual memory of the love that they had, or if it's just that they are both intrinsically the same people as their innies, and that they would tend to be drawn to each other. There, we see that it does seem to cross over. With Mark and Gemma, we see the inverse of that, which is, as he's looking at her, part of it would be easier if he did feel love for this woman and if he could fulfill the mission that he sort of had since the beginning of the season, which is to save her. And that's all well and good. Obviously, this is an interesting idea, but it's just simply not true. Like, Bert and Irving aren't the only example of stuff transcending Severance. It's not that it works differently for them. It's a consistent theme throughout the show. I've told you all of the ways that this happens, multiple times through all of Severance. And we're told that it literally works with Mark. Told sort of repeatedly and unequivocally that Mark loves Gemma, that both versions of him love Gemma and are grieving that she's dead. All that stuff I put a pin in earlier, you know, think back on it now. Think about what that means for the rest of the show. It means something. It has to mean something. It is the emotional core of the entire story up until this point. But no, when Mark is faced with Gemma, he feels absolutely nothing. He doesn't care for this woman, and he must turn away. The only reason why this would make sense as a choice is because it gets Dan Erickson out of having to make a difficult decision. It all seems like a sensible thing to say, but if you really think about it, you have to conclude that no, actually, it doesn't make Mark's life easier if he feels nothing for Gemma. Kind of shocked that he said this, like I literally don't really know what he means by that. How would it be easier? It would be easier if he had to pick between two women who he genuinely loved. That would be a harder decision, actually, not an easier one. Even Adam Scott doesn't seem to agree with this. He literally called the decision a no-brainer. It's, you know, if he doesn't care about Gemma, then it's pretty obvious he's not gonna go with Gemma. Like they do, you know, they want Mark to go back in with Helly. They want to have a show that will keep having a reason to exist. But to do that, they have to pretend that they've written a different show than they did. And if you just leave it up to a choice, then people are going to get mad at you, you know? It's like that Resident Evil game where they ask, you know, do you want to give a cure to your wife or to this woman you met? Obviously you pick your wife. Why wouldn't you pick your wife? That's your wife. Dan Erickson knows this, and he's trying to get you to think that's not the case by making up lies about his own show, but it's not true. Mark literally cares about Gemma. I've seen the show. You know, some people maybe haven't, Dan Erickson, but I have. I watched the whole thing, and I can tell you, he does. He does like that woman. I was there. It also has the knock-on effect of kind of ruining the whole, you know, love transcending Severance. Capitalism can take everything away from you, but it can't take your feelings, it can't take love. Because it tells us that it actually can. It can take love. It can do that. Capitalism will make you hate your wife. They will take caring about your wife from you, and there is nothing you can do. To be clear, again, I'm saying that, and I think that's kind of rules. I think it seems interesting, the idea that they can, you know, they can make you hate your wife. But it's a different show, right? Like, that's not actually the show we've been watching. The one where they can make you hate your wife. That's a new show. I like that show also. But it's not the same one.
No, I don't know how to fucking drive. I don't know what any of this shit is, and I'm fucking scared.
The thing is that once you notice that, you start noticing there's actually several decisions made, specifically in the second season of Severance, that seem to exist basically just to get the writers out of corners. Mark's reintegration, for example, is handled so poorly that I don't even think the biggest offenders of the show would tell me that it's done well. Every other episode promises a big breakthrough, Mark's reintegration, then we get one big and interesting sequence about it before it's treated as something that basically never happened, because the interesting parts of the story can't happen if Mark is actually reintegrated. The show wants to have its cake and eat it too, the cake being, you know, a cool, evocative Mark reintegration scene, and eating the cake being continuing to make a show that's interesting and has stuff that happens in it. Worst and most annoying example of this is when the Marks are arguing about whose loved one is more important. You know, Outie Mark wants his Innie to go and free his wife, and Innie Mark just wants to hang out with his GF all day, and doesn't want to have to be doing any of that rescuing a wife business. In this scene, Outie Mark offers reintegration as kind of a bargaining chip. He tells his Innie that, you know, you go and get my wife and we'll reintegrate and we'll become one guy again. Mark tells his Innie that if he can just help him get Gemma, then he'll finish reintegrating, they can become one person again. The problem is that there have been like 3 different Mark reintegration scenes at this point, with him given no indication that Mark needs to finish reintegrating. Like, this is the first time we learn the information that Mark can make a decision to go and finish reintegrating. I thought he was reintegrating. I mean, I thought he'd done that. So far, like, 3 or 4 times now, Mark has made the decision to reintegrate, you would assume to completion, but it's not the case. Every time you see him again, he's still not reintegrated. Why? What's happening? And now he says that he has to finish reintegrating? What would that even mean? Literally, what does it mean? This is a vital conversation. I mean, this literally determines what's going to happen next in the plot. It's not like a throwaway line. He's going to finish reintegrating. How? I guess there's an assumption that Mark is lying, but, you know, the assumption isn't that Mark is literally lying about the fact that reintegration is possible. He's lying about whether he's going to do it or not. Even though I only just found out that's the thing he could do. Later in the season 2 finale, we learn that Helly doesn't know what the equator is. I know this is literally nitpicking, but I just can't. She knows about Delaware. I think that's the state they say. I think she knows about Delaware. Why does she not know about, why would she not know where the equator is? It's not, like, relevant information to her. You know, Dylan knows about muscle shows. He doesn't just know the word muscle show, disconnected from any experience of what it might be. Irving knows that gardeners don't work at night. He doesn't just know he doesn't just know the word gardener. He's not, he's not sitting asking them like, what do you think a gardener does? He just knows. He knows about gardeners. He knows they work in the day. Hell, he doesn't even know what the equator is. I mean, it doesn't matter at all. Like, really, it's fine. It doesn't make the show worse in any way that Helly doesn't know what the equator is. It just feels like it tells us that nothing matters. The events of the show in the second season are just treated so loosely, so unimportantly. I feel like I shouldn't even be trying to work out what Severance is or how it functions or how we can get out of this. It feels like that stopped being the point a while ago. You might be hearing me say all that and you're just thinking, that doesn't matter at all. Shows cannot make sense. Shows don't have to make sense. They don't have to have, a consistent internal logic. And I think that's a great thing to say to me when I said that Severance doesn't make sense, because I literally agree. Two of my favorite shows of all time, Twin Peaks and Neon Genesis Evangelion, they don't make any sense at all. None of the events of those shows make sense. In Twin Peaks, there's just like a scene where there's a horse for no reason. That's not explained. There's no internal logic to that decision. Evangelion can't decide the size that the mechs are. They're every size. They're whatever size is more convenient. It doesn't matter. I don't care about those things. I don't think it makes the shows worse that they don't care about those things either. So then, why do I care that Severance is consistent, that it has an internal logic that makes sense? The difference, I think, is that the problem is that Severance is inconsistent about the things that it's literally about. I don't care about the size of the mechs in Evangelion, because that's not what the show is. The show is about being a depressed 14-year-old and having daddy issues, and it portrays those things perfectly. Evangelion is actually very consistent in its characterization and how the characters feel towards one another and how they feel towards the world, because that's the important part of the show. Severance is a mystery show, and it's a workplace satire. The things that matter in it are the story. Things that matter in Severance are the plot. Things that matter are how Severance works and what a world with Severance would be like. It's about critiquing corporate culture, and Severance is a big part of that, so it has to be kind of consistent. The whole world outside of Lumen actually doesn't need to be consistent at all. That's not what the show's about. It doesn't care about that. It cares about Severance. When Severance has Mark walk away from Gemma at the end of season 2, it tells me that I shouldn't care about how Severance works, and I shouldn't care about Mark and Gemma and Helly as characters. Because it already showed me that, caring about these things, what the Severance procedure is, what it does, how the characters react to it, doesn't impact the events of the show. No, the events of Severance will always be whatever is literally easiest. The internal logic of the show does not matter, and you shouldn't care about it.
Can I just ask, what's next? Just so I know, what's next?
Severance Season 2 had a lot of background production issues. Ben Stiller brought in his own producers who didn't get along with Dan Erickson, and there was, strikes and rewrites, and it took forever to film, and, there was a lot of stuff holding them back. Given all that, at a certain point, just getting anything out of there must have basically been the priority. I'm very sympathetic to that. I mean, I think, in the eternal words of Jesse Armstrong, look, guys, TV is just really hard. But it also doesn't make good television, right? Like, I'm not blaming them. I'm not saying they're bad people for making a show bad, but the show has become worse because of it, and that's an issue for me, a guy who likes to watch good TV shows. But, the aim of this video isn't even really to criticize the show. I still like the show. I think Severance is really great. Again, I literally watched it all. I never stopped. I watched the whole thing. And I do like the finale in a, The Graduate kind of way. I think it's a really, interesting and fun way to end the season. I think there's a lot to like. I think the Mark reintegration sequences are really, really cool. I just wish they went somewhere. But I want to, I'm not trying to criticize. I think it's interesting to sit and consider, You know, what makes TV work? Why did Severance used to be better, in my opinion? Why do I think that? Is it an interesting answer? I thought so. I made a video about it, and it's maybe half an hour long. I don't really know. I haven't edited it yet. I'll find out later. But you know, because I like the show, I like what it has to say. That means I care about Severance as a concept. I care about how it's treated, how it's depicted. And that's the reason why, you know, it sort of stops working. Other people who care about these things seem to, you know, try and defend the show, and they get mad at fans of Severance for being really into shipping or whatever. Me personally, I don't really care about any of the romantic relationships in Severance. I don't think any of those actors have much chemistry. I like Burr and Irving, you know, I think they're cute. But it's not like the most vital part of the show to me. I do kind of have to acknowledge, though, that the show actually does care deeply. The show loves being about romantic relationships. I mean, you know, Severance is effectively about a love triangle at this point. And to kind of deny that and to think people are silly for caring about it seems disingenuous. You know, that is what the show cares about. It cares about it more than it cares about, you know, its kind of sci-fi premise. That's kind of all I have to say about Severance. That's everything I had to tell you in this video. This is a regular fabric plaster. Oh my god. It's a regular fabric plaster that I colored in. Like a weird look, if you look at it really close. You can see it's not really very well done.